You can't just go around rescuing animals. You can't just feed them. You can't just interfere with efforts to control invasive species. Well, unless you're a pro with solid arguments by your side.
We're tired of seeing animals targeted because people feel that they're a nuisance or pose some kind of an inconvenience.
If you're driven by emotions, you'll probably do more harm than good. I've seen it all while researching for today's video. Guess I need another cup of coffee. In 1997, by the way, just a friendly reminder to drop a like right now if you often forget to do it at the end of the video. So in 1997, the National Wildlife Institute, working with the University of Turin, came up with a plan to get rid of gray squirrels in Italy. They figured it all out. According to their plan, wiping out the squirrels could save local species threatened by the invasive creatures. But despite this, some hardcore animal rights activists opposed the project. Animal rights activists took the National Wildlife Institute to court in June 1997, which naturally caused everything to come to a halt. The project got suspended, followed by a lengthy investigation and legal proceedings, wrapping up in July 2000. Scientists won the case, getting the green light to wipe out the invasive squirrels. But by then it was too late. In just 3 years during the legal process, the creatures managed to greatly expand their territory, so much so that trying to get rid of them became pointless. Well, technically they call it impractical. The gist is there were already too many squirrels to do anything about them. In the medium and long term, gray squirrels are likely to spread throughout continental Eurasia, and there's little we can do to stop them. It's because we missed the chance. We should have dealt with their eradication when there weren't so many of them around. Biologists who focus on preserving nature might come off as harsh because they see invasive species as a serious threat to biodiversity. To deal with invasions, these scientists often suggest completely eradicating invasive species, even if they're small, cute, and fluffy creatures. This cute and fluffy creature, believe it or not, is considered one of the most aggressive invasive species on the planet. Introduced from North America 140 years ago, the gray squirrel has now colonized large parts of the United Kingdom, putting the local red squirrel population at risk of extinction. The gray squirrel has taken over nearly 770 square miles of northwestern Italy, and efforts to stop this invasion were blocked by animal rights advocates. Now this invasive species has the chance to spread into France and Switzerland, eventually pushing out native squirrels from much of their habitat. It all began in 1948 when the gray squirrel was introduced to Piedmont, marking its first appearance in continental Europe. Just 2 pairs of squirrels were brought over from Washington, D.C. and released in Stupinigi, Turin province. In 1966, 5 more animals brought from Norfolk, Virginia were released into the park at Villa Grappolo at Genoa Nervi. The third release happened in 1994 when 3 pairs were let loose in Tricade Park. They were captured and removed in 1996, but this didn't change the situation. The few squirrels that arrived in Italy at different times started breeding very quickly and in large numbers. Gray squirrels are different from other species because they don't need a big group to form a new population. Studies of all the successful releases show that in 71.4% of cases, only 10 squirrels were needed to create a stable population, expand, and cause problems for native species. These creatures sure know how to cause trouble. Between 1970 and 2010, the red squirrel population in Italy shrank by 62%, which roughly accounts for 652 square miles, and the invasive gray squirrels took over. For the first 20 years, their spread was pretty slow, but then the invaders doubled their pace. The problem with invasive species is that they're always great at adapting to new environments. The gray squirrel is adapted to the climate and habitats in both northern and southern Europe, posing a serious threat to the survival of the red squirrel. The species is already endangered in Europe, and the situation isn't getting any better. Plus, there are economic issues to consider as well. In the UK, gray squirrels are causing significant damage to forests and commercial woodlands. These invasive creatures have a nasty habit of stripping bark from trees, creating wounds that allow insects and fungi to get in. This seriously degrades the quality of the wood, with hardwood suffering the most. Native squirrels are also affected. This map shows how invasive species are taking over the islands. One major issue is that invasive squirrels are competing with red ones for food. The competition is fierce because the gray squirrels steal the local squirrels' food supplies. As a result, the native squirrels grow smaller, struggle to gain weight, don't reproduce as much, and eventually die out. They don't really have any other option in this situation. But competition for food isn't the only problem. Another serious problem is the squirrel pox virus. This virus is spread from invasive squirrels to the local ones. Gray squirrels only carry the virus without getting sick or dying from it. Unfortunately, red squirrels aren't so lucky. They get scabs on their faces, paws, and genitalia. Eventually, the disease kills them. The virus works so fast that it kills the host shortly after infection, making it rare to see an infected squirrel. You either find them healthy or already dead. And as if all that wasn't enough, gray squirrels also raid the nests of local birds. Why do they do it? Sometimes they eat bird eggs and might even snack on chicks if they get the chance. Since it's too late to eradicate the gray squirrel, the best we can do now is predict its future spread. The current ranges look like this. Gray areas show where gray squirrels are found, red indicates red squirrels, and orange marks the regions where their territories overlap. In the best case scenario, gray squirrels might reach the Western Alps between 2026 and 2036, France between 2066 and 2071, and Switzerland between 2051 and 2066. However, if things take a turn for the worse, well, they could get there much sooner. Considering what happened on the British Isles, things don't look good for Italy and the rest of continental Europe. If the gray squirrels have already multiplied, which they have, culling won't make a difference. Sure, you can try to reclaim some territory from the invasive species, but those victories don't last. The creatures will breed again and quickly reoccupy the area you thought you had cleared. So here's the deal. We can't win this war. That ship has sailed. Animal rights activists believed they were doing the right thing when they took action on May 8, 2015. They went into a Chinese restaurant in Dublin and opened the tank where lobsters were kept, then took all of them away. Later, 11 people released the lobsters into the sea at Clontarf, a neighborhood in Dublin. They felt they were saving the animals from being eaten. The thing is, those lobsters most likely didn't make it. You can't just take an animal, release it at a random place, and expect everything to turn out fine. Usually, when animals are set free like that, they die because they're not adapted to that kind of freedom. For instance, lobsters usually live in warm tropical waters like the Caribbean Sea, but Dublin's nowhere near that kind of climate. And the Irish Sea is way too chilly for lobsters to survive without a serious struggle. Plus, there are unfamiliar predators, prey, and even diseases they're not equipped to handle. So chances are these poor guys met their end even quicker than if they'd ended up on a dinner plate. If the lobsters did indeed survive, it means one thing. Animal rights activists simply introduced an alien species into an environment where it isn't naturally found. This hardly ever ends well. Once again, it's more harm than good. Did you know that several types of crustaceans like shrimp, lobsters, and crabs can reproduce without mating? Why is this significant? I'll explain in a moment. Crustaceans that settle in unfamiliar environments can turn into a major headache if they can reproduce without a mate. For example, marbled crayfish. In 1995, a biology student bought a bag of these crayfish from American sellers at a pet fair in Frankfurt. They were sold as Texas crayfish, but when the crayfish started multiplying at an alarming rate, the student decided he no longer wanted to keep them. He gave them to his friends, who ended up releasing them into rivers, lakes, and even flushing them down toilets. This was just the beginning of, well, not the end of the world or a disaster, but marbled crayfish quickly spread across Germany, most of mainland Europe, and especially on the island of Madagascar. And over there, by the way, the freshwater ecosystems are unique but extremely fragile. When scientists discovered the invasion, they were stunned by the way these crayfish reproduce. Essentially, these creatures clone themselves, reproducing from a single cell, almost like cancer cells. Today, every single marbled crayfish in existence comes from one original female. Each crayfish breeds about 4 times a year. And since they don't need males, there's no time or energy wasted searching for a mate. As a result, one female can start a population of millions of genetically identical females, and they'll create millions more, and millions more after that. Germany offers money for catching marbled crayfish, but the reward is quite small. Authorities fear that raising the payment could lead to people breeding these fast-reproducing crayfish simply to sell them back to the state. Marbled crayfish are so plentiful that you can just go to the park, turn on a flashlight, and pull out about 150 of them from the water in an hour using just your hands. It's easier than picking mushrooms. Meanwhile, in Madagascar, where this species arrived around 2007, the population of marbled crayfish now numbers in the millions. Naturally, local species are at risk. crawfish can turn into a worldwide problem. Louisiana crawfish, for instance, are destroying freshwater fish and other animals in countries like Egypt, Kenya, South Africa, and Germany. That's why when animal advocates rescue them, there's a big risk of introducing invasive, harmful species into the wild that could completely disrupt the local ecosystem. In 2017, two activists released hundreds of lobsters and crabs into the sea near Brighton, intending to sell and eat them. They let the animals go into the ocean without even checking who they were, and it turned out to be a mistake. It was found that these were American lobsters considered invasive in the UK, so releasing them into local waters not only broke the law, but also caused harm, of course. So before rescuing animals, make sure to do your research. Okay, to be exact, those two in Brighton weren't animal rights activists. They were performing a Buddhist ceremony called life release, where animals slated for slaughter are saved and released back into the wild. However, this didn't help them with the police, and the police fined the Buddhists over $20,000. And this is just a drop in the bucket because authorities spent around $23,000 trying to catch invasive lobsters, but only managed to get half. So the expenses exceeded the fine. In theory, there's this creature that could save Europe from invasive crustaceans. The catch? It's invasive itself. Let me introduce you to the round goby found in Central Eurasia as well as in the Black and Caspian Seas. It's not welcome in major European rivers, seen as an invasive creature that threatens the local biodiversity. But on the bright side, this goby is a fierce eater, especially when it comes to marble crayfish. It straight up dominates them. These two species don't interact much yet, but it looks like their encounters will become more frequent soon. Unfortunately, nobody knows exactly what'll happen as a result. Maybe the gobies and marble crayfish will balance each other out. Alternatively, with an endless food source that clones itself, the gobies might just take over everything nearby. We'll have to wait a bit to find out.
We're tired of seeing animals targeted because people feel that they're a nuisance or pose some kind of an inconvenience.
It's not just that invasive species are inconvenient. Problems with animals whose populations can't be controlled due to animal rights activists extend beyond squirrels and crayfish. In 2003, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Maryland Department of Natural Resources planned to cull mute swan populations, but they hit a roadblock. The animal rights group cited the National Environmental Policy Act, arguing that invasive birds should be protected, not killed. Around 13,000 mute swans currently call the Atlantic Flyway home. It's a stretch of land along the east coast from Canada down to Florida, where migratory birds pass through every year. 13,000 may sound like a lot, but think about this. Maryland's mute swan population, staying around 3,600 birds in the bay and surrounding areas, started from just 5 birds. Can you believe that? Since their first release or escape into the wild, their population has been growing at incredible rates. From 1986 to 1999, the number of mute swans in Rhode Island shot up by nearly 80%, and it seems like they'll keep doubling every 3 to 4 years all along the coast. It's obvious we've got to do something about this.
And it's absolutely cruelty. It's a horrible act by the conservation people.
The status of the mute swan as an invasive species in North America is being challenged by the interest group Save the Mute Swans. The members argue that mute swans are native to this region and therefore deserve protection. The authorities disagree. Officially, mute swans are not only classified as an invasive species, but are also considered one of the most aggressive types of waterfowl worldwide. Locals here are complaining about too many swans, yet activists for animal rights reckon we don't need to resort to lethal measures. There's got to be a different fix for this, especially since people adore these elegant white birds. Maybe they want to ask them to stop breeding. Back in 2001, when Maryland's legislature passed a law allowing lethal control of mute swans, two activists stood firm on keeping at least 500 of them. Considering how quickly the population grows, the idea, well, let's just say it wasn't too bright. In case you're wondering, the mute swans in the U.S. were actually brought over from Europe on purpose. People wanted to liven up their ponds and lakes with some beauty and life, so they thought, what could be better than swans? Back then in Europe, these swans were highly valued and adorned just about everything. Mute swans were a common sight in the private ponds of the nobility. Then in the 1800s, as American cities began sprouting up, they started creating gardens and parks with ponds, and where there's a pond, there had to be swans. They'd clip their wings to keep them from flying away. However, these swans, or their descendants, quickly went feral. Thanks to their rapid breeding, lack of natural predators, and plenty of suitable habitat, decorative park swans turned into huge populations. It wasn't pretty. Not only are people complaining about swan attacks, And let me remind you, those birds can be darn aggressive, but swans are wreaking havoc on the other local waterfowl and birds around the water. Like any invasive species, these mute swans are pushing out the native feathered species, gobbling up all the vegetation they feed on, and just generally being rude. Biologists literally say that mute swans can disrupt the natural food chain simply because they're so voracious. Several studies have shown a significant decrease in aquatic vegetation and even the complete disappearance of some plant species. They were just eaten. Naturally, fish that depend on these plants also suffer. Don't forget there's a mating season when mute swans can take over an area as big as 10 acres, aggressively pushing away all other species, even the local ones. But those locals need their own space to nest too. Swans drive other birds away from their nests and sometimes even kill their chicks. All in all, they're not the kind of neighbors anyone would wish for. Amidst all this, the persistent desire to protect swans might seem like siding with troublemakers, not because defending animals is wrong, it's a great initiative, but for it to work, it should be based on the biologist's expertise. There are even documented cases of collaboration that benefited both animal rights activists and conservation biologists. For instance, they successfully implemented a program to handle feral pigs in Fort Worth, Texas. They made sure to inform all concerned parties about the harm caused by the pigs, explaining the details thoroughly and possibly repeating it more than once. Then animal advocates collaborated with biologists to devise a plan for culling, seeking out the most humane methods of euthanasia, and deciding on ways to dispose of the animals. You know what? It turned out great because they share the same goal, taking care of nature the right way. Don't forget to leave a like. See you later.